Hello, everyone. My name is Andrew LeBeau, and I am bringing you this webinar today. The title of the webinar is Get Ready for Dotmatics 7.1, a UX Revolution. And so I'll be with you for the next 60 minutes or so, taking you through the new release of the Dotmatics platform. In today's webinar, it is being recorded and it will be available for streaming in about a day. Every registrant will get a link to that. So if you registered but aren't able to attend live, you'll get that. If you are attending live, then welcome, and you'll get a chance to then review any parts of the webinar you want to look at again, or potentially share that with your colleagues. Now, today's presentation will be a mix of slides and a live demonstration. During the course of the webinar, I will ask you to please enter questions into the Q&A panel. There are two panels that you can enter information into in the Zoom webinar. One is the Q&A panel, and there's also a chat panel. Please enter them into the Q&A panel. I have the product management team for the Dotmatics platform, as well as our moderator, watching for those questions. They will answer them as they come in during the course of the webinar. I do anticipate taking up most of the hour, the 60 minutes that we have in the formal part of the presentations. That the idea is to get your questions answered as quickly as possible during the course of the webinar. So just to reiterate, please find the Q&A panel, not the chat panel, in the Zoom interface, and enter your questions into there. Any questions that are a little bit more specific to a given customer, we'll potentially take offline. We'll try and answer as many as we can. If there are more than we can answer, then we'll get back to you subsequently. And again, for anything that's more specific to your implementation of the platform, it's really not relevant for the broad audience. We'll just follow up with you directly after the call. As I said, the platform management team are on the call, and as I said, we'll try and answer those questions in the Q&A panel during the event. Okay, so I'm very excited to announce that we have released version 7.1 of the Dotmatics platform. It was released on July 12th, so just last week. It's now available for download on the Dotmatics download site. If you're an on-premises customer, you should have access to that. If you're a hosted customer, then you can contact us, and we start to put a plan in place to start to upgrade your servers with the new release. Version 7.10 is the formal name of this release. It is what we call a major release. By major, we mean it increments the first number. So you can see the timeline down to the bottom part of the slide. The previous feature release was version 6.2 that came out in November of last year. So we have incremented the 6 to the 7. That denotes a major release. And includes many new capabilities and changes. So that's what we'll be talking about today. But I do want to give you a sense of what's coming in the future. We plan a minor release, so that's where we increment the second digit. So 7.2 release is anticipated for Q4 of this year. And then we anticipate further minor releases. So 7.3 would be the next increment in the first half of next year. We will also, as we have been doing, we'll issue patch releases. These are bug fix only releases. This is where we increment the third digit. So 7.1.0 is out on Friday. We have actually issued a 7.1.1. We had a late breaking issue that we needed to deal with, but then we'll continue to release patch releases on the 7 series and also the 6 series going forward. So if you're on the 6 series, we will continue to do bug fix releases for that. No new feature releases on the 6 series. All new feature work will go into the 7 series. So to attain those new features, you want to put a plan in place to upgrade to the 7 series. For the 7.10 release, I'm going to go through the high-level new capabilities in the release over the course of the next 50 minutes or so. We break these up into 2 broad areas. Now, the first is what we term modern high-quality experience, and the second is what we call scientific innovation. I'll take you through those in turn. I'll cover the modern high-quality experience, new capabilities, and then I'll cover what's new in terms of scientific innovation, which is essentially a collection of tools to help you do better science with the Dotmatics platform. So a little background on why we have this initiative around modern high quality experience. We've had feedback over the last 2 to 3 years or so, and we've been working on 7.1 for about the last 12 months in earnest. That while customers really appreciate the deep and rich science within the platform, we did get some feedback that as the platform has evolved, there are some challenges in terms of usability and UI. And it was time to look at improving some of that usability, the UX aspect of it, as well as some of the UI, the user interface part of it. And so we really wanted to evolve the platform to provide, as it says here, a more modern, a more high quality experience. And we went out and did some user research. We did a couple of rounds at least. And some of the strongest feedback we got was that as the richness of the platform has evolved, has meant that navigating around the platform and finding the right place to do the work has become a little bit more challenging. And this is not unusual in software as it develops, as you add more features to any software product, it inherently can become more difficult to use because there's just more options, there's more menu systems, it's harder to find sometimes the functionality that you want. So this was a key focus for us for the 7.10 release. So this slide sort of lays out 5 key areas of UX UI improvement, and I'll go through them in detail. The first groups together the first 2 key capabilities, and these are what we refer to as top-level navigation and capability navigation. And think of this as a hierarchy. Top-level navigation, it is the top of the page, but that was a result of our design work. It wasn't necessarily preordained. But it is the top of the page, and it's also the top of the hierarchy. It's if you want to know where you are in the application and where to go to do the next task, that's where you it's your North Star, essentially. It's where you look first to find where it is you need to navigate. And I'll show you that in some detail over the next slides in the live demonstration. The second tier to navigation is the capability navigation. Once you navigate at the top level, then you come to essentially the second level. It's the left as the application works. And this is how you get into the next level down of the various capabilities that you need to access to perform whatever task it is you're looking to perform. This will become clear over the next few slides. So let's talk about that top navigation, or the first tier of navigation. And here in the screenshot here, the upper screenshot is the top bar blown up, zoomed in of the new navigation within the Dotmatics platform. When you upgrade to 7, this is what you will see. And I'll go through the details in a minute. In the lower screenshot, I've got it highlighted in the top part of a page here. The red border is just on the slide. It's to highlight this is what we're talking about when we talk about the top navigation bar. So the key parts of the navigation bar, there's really 2 key parts. The first one is highlighted here. When you have selected the area that's highlighted here is termed ELN, then this is one of 2 primary navigation points or access points to the capabilities of the system. And so just 2, so we keep it very simple. So in very simple terms, if you are in the ELN context, so if you've clicked on the ELN button here, and so it's highlighted with the green, the bar and the green bordering and the background there, this means that you're in a mode that we think of as data in or data capture. You are doing tasks that are associated with getting data into the system. So that could be actually working within ELN forms, but it also includes other data capture or data in tasks such as registering items, adding items to inventory, etc. And you'll see this as we go through the rest of the slides in the live presentation. So think of ELN as the data in, data capture context. Now, the converse of that is what we term data discovery. And this is a new term in 7.10 in the 7 series. In this context, you are essentially, it's the data out or data analysis context. So this is where you are looking to analyze data, get information out, make interpretations, draw conclusions, to ultimately make decisions and then start the next phase or the next cycle of work. In pre-7, you would think of this primarily as the browser part of the application. But over the past couple of years, we've added more capabilities. We've essentially coalesced some of the standalone capabilities such as Blueprint, which we now rename as Workspace, and other capabilities into Browser. So we can think of data discovery almost like Browser Plus. So whenever I say data discovery, as I said, it's a new term. You can think of it as browser in the former language, but the term browser now is no longer part of the system. We don't mind if you keep using it. We'll keep using it. It's a useful term to use, but making that association between browser or maybe browser plus, because it's additional functionality, and the term data discovery in the system. So that's the top navigation bar. That's the top. You're either in one of those two contexts. You're in a data in context, where you're in the ELN, or you're data out context, where you're in data discovery or browser plus. Let's step down to the next tier, which we think of as the capability navigation. And we'll do them in turn. We'll do first capability navigation for the ELN. So again, this is the data in or data capture context. And this slide highlights the challenge that we were looking to address with the 7.1 release. So you can see to the left-hand side of the slide here, I'm not sure if you're seeing my mouse or not, but you can see this is the new interface in 7.1. And as you can see, we're in the ELN context that's highlighted. So you can see here all the capabilities. So protocols, notebooks, plate properties, inventory, buy register, chem register, and requests. These are all capabilities that were typically formerly standalone capabilities that were part of the platform. And we've really tried to make them seem more of a combined set of capabilities, all associated primarily with data in or data capture. You can see that we've got the individual icons, the ST for studies, IN for inventory, BI for buy register, et cetera, icons that were used to denote those individual capabilities previous to 7.1. In the new release, those icons have gone away. We've moved towards not separate names for those capabilities, or not separate branded names, but rather just purely descriptive names. Some of them are the same, buy register is the same, but you'll note that Cascade, which is a name, it doesn't really denote what that capability was, has been changed to requests because it's much more descriptive of what you're doing. You are making requests, you are managing requests. So that's the new interface for the ELN. You'll see it live in the demonstration shortly. But why did we make this change? And that's highlighted in the other screenshots in the slide. So from left to right here, we have studies, inventory, register, cascade, and buy register. You can see the first four look pretty similar, but with just differences. Buy register looks completely different in terms of the left panel, the navigation part. So as I said, studies, inventory, register, cascade, they look similar, but you'll notice that the left panels here with the dark blue bar with the white icons, they're all different. They're different icons. Sometimes we occasionally use the same icon to do different things. So not an ideal user experience. And the strong feedback we got was that users just found it difficult to navigate around here. If there's different home buttons or different the spanner icon or the wrench icon, right? What does that mean? What do I do with that? How do I navigate from one of these capabilities to the other? And that was a challenge that many users were facing that we wanted to simplify, and we believe we have with the 7.1 release. So that's on the ELN side. Let's look at capability navigation and sort of highlight the problem on the data discovery side. So similar here, we don't have the 7.1 icon graphic here, but we see in the 6.2 release, we have the browser to the left here, we have Workspace, and we have Reaction Explorer. So these Workspace, which was formerly Blueprint, and Reaction Explorer, these were capabilities that were previously standalone that we had combined into browser, and we think that's a really good move. It made them seem more integrated and provide more streamlined workflows, but it came at the cost of making navigating around and accessing them somewhat complex. So this is highlighted if we look at the browser screenshot to the left. We have actions such as forms, queries, lists, and views that are intimately associated with queries and forms and browsing. And then we have an icon called Workspaces that jumps you to an entirely new application, sort of replaces the browser application with a new application Workspace with its own left navigation. And similarly with Reaction Exploration or Reaction Explorer, an icon that jumps you to, replaces the current left navigation and application with a new view, with a new menu system. And again, users just found that very challenging to work with. And so we wanted to simplify that all out. So we did a couple of rounds of research with users, end users, externally. We also did detailed research internally, and we came up with this new navigation system that I'm going to show you now. So if I go to the live demonstration, this is a 7.1 server running actually a solutions configuration. And I'll navigate through and show you, sort of navigate around the interface here. Looking at the top bar first, you can see we just have the Dotmatics logo, nothing else going on there. Here is the key part. We have the ELN, which is the selected option at the moment, or data discovery. So it's a simple click to navigate to that. So simple back and forth. And for most users, most of the time, they'll be in one of these two contexts. Again, emphasizing ELN being the data in or data capture context, data discovery being the data out or data analysis context, and think of it as essentially browse or browser plus. If I move across to the right-hand side, upper right side of the application, we have a notifications icon. Here's another fairly significant change in previous to 7. We have some of the individual capabilities that generate notifications. But in order to see a notification for a given capability or given module, you had to be in that module to see it. So if you wanted to see a notification in ELN in studies, as it was named back then, or in the 6th release, you had to go to studies to see that. And similarly for other applications or other capabilities that generated notifications. In 7.1, all the notifications will be highlighted here in this top bar. The top bar will be ever present for the users, and any notifications, no matter which application, which module they're in, you'll be able to access them here. Well, I don't have any notifications, but if there were unread notifications, you would see the typical little red icon that indicated you had unread notifications. You would simply click on this button and you would see them again from whatever module they're coming from. I'm an admin here, so there's the configuration option here. So some other key changes to support actually our admins as well as our end users. System settings are now coalesced into a single access point here. So if you want to change any of the system settings across the whole entire application, be it on the ELN side or data discovery side, you would access them from here. Similarly for user management. And again, this is a big change from the previous series and the 6th series, where to set system settings on the ELN side, you had to go to the ELN. You had to then, to set them on the browser side, you had to go to browser. Similarly for user management. Here now, there's a single entry point to setting those system settings and user management. You'll notice a new capability here, Configuration Management Hub. I'll highlight that a little bit later in the presentation. Next, we have our documentation. One of the other big changes in 7.1 is we have completely revamped our documentation system. Previously, we had it self-hosted. With 7, we have moved to a commercial provider to support our documentation. To the end user, it should be relatively transparent, but it does mean for us internally, it means our ability to deliver documentation to you is much enhanced. And so you end users will get a benefit of that through our ability to provide that in a more streamlined fashion. So another big change. And then finally, as part of the top bar, we have the individual profile. So here I'm logged in as a user here. I also happen to be an admin. So that's why I'm seeing some of the additional admin functions here. So I can go to my user settings. I can access my API documentation, information about the system, and ultimately log out if that's what I want to do. So that's the top bar, again, emphasizing that it will always be present. And again, the key parts are you're in one of these two contexts, ELN or data discovery. Now, that's the top level navigation. Let's come down to the second tier navigation. Here we have to the left-hand side here, we see the individual applications or modules or capabilities that are associated with data in, primarily with data in or data capture. First thing to note is that we have both icons and labels for these capabilities. This was a very strong piece of feedback that we received, that users sometimes are not sure what individual icons mean, and they wanted labels. Other users want the real estate. So we give you that option. By default, you'll see the labels, but I can collapse down to see just the icons and give me that little bit extra screen real estate. Let's expand that out a bit more. And then, and so here, really, it's very easy for me with this left panel, again, always present. If I'm in the ELN context, this left panel will always be present, either expanded or collapsed. And now I can navigate to the various capabilities. The focus in 7.1 really is around improving the navigation, the idea being to get the user to where they need to be to perform a task. We have made also limited changes to some of the individual capabilities, but not really large changes for the most part. I'll highlight a couple of the key changes if I go into protocols. So these are my ELN protocols. If I access them here, you can see there's a large list of protocols here. One of the things we've changed is that I can access these. They look very obviously like a link that I can click to access that protocol. That was always the case, but we kind of made the hyperlinks a bit difficult to define, difficult to determine that they were links. It wasn't always obvious, so we made them really obvious now. So that's one of the key changes within the ELN system. Otherwise, you can see a lot of what you're already familiar with in terms of expanding out, accessing various notebooks. As we come down here, we can access other capabilities such as inventory. This is pretty empty at the moment. This is just a test server that we've set up. But you can also access bioregister, chem register. We've added in reaction workflows into the ELN as primarily a data capture tool. So it fits with the data capture aspects here. And then I'll just click and highlight request management. So this was formerly Cascade. One of the other significant changes around UI is that we've completely revamped the Cascade and now requests interface. It's much nicer and much friendlier and much more consistent with the overall system than the previous interface was. So that highlights kind of the new navigation around the ELN or data capture, data in capabilities. Now let's go to data discovery and take a look here. So now, again, we're in the context, a data out, data analysis context. I'm doing querying and browsing. I might want to analyze some data, in workspaces, etc. A few things to highlight here. The first thing is that we are very conscious that in making these changes, we don't make it more difficult to do a task that you're familiar with doing. So one of the things that users are very familiar with doing is very quickly running a query. And so here from the landing page for data discovery, again, think of it as Browser Plus, I have immediate access to my projects. I can simply click on one of my projects. Let's do chemical registry. I can, of course, parameterize this, and then I can run the query. And so that runs the query, and I get my results. So at a minimum, 2 clicks to run a query. Obviously, more clicks if I parameterize that query, which I would normally do. But simply 2 clicks and plus whatever parameterization to run a query. So very quick to run a query. We're not making it more difficult to do a very common task. But let's come back and look a bit more formally at some of the other changes. So that's all well and good if you're an experienced user. You want quick access to information. But let's say you're a new user or a less frequent user. We also want to guide you in a very stepwise fashion through creating new queries or accessing existing queries or other assets here. So if we come back and click on queries and lists, so think of this queries and lists essentially being the browser capability. Here, I'm going to first also create a new query, but in what we call the more sort of standard or more formalized way. So there's a very obvious button here, say create query. This brings me to an interface. Here, chemical registry is already pre-selected because that was the project I was in. You can also set a default by user. But if I wanted to change that, I have access to all the different projects here. So again, the philosophy being we want to try and provide suitable, intelligent defaults for you, but also give you the options to change those. The second option here is the type of the query. We anticipate most users are doing form queries. This is probably 90+% of the type of queries that users perform. But we also, and so that's the default option, but you can also access a logic query or a logic list. Browser allows these, browser has always allowed these, or for the longest time, but accessing logic queries or logic lists was not as obvious, and so was hidden, and we think probably an underused capability simply because it was a bit hard to find. And so we want to make this more prominent, but still give you the natural default of being a form query. All queries have to have a name, and so we pre-populate a query name here. I can change this. So I'll call it webinar query 1. I could have just run with the default if I'm not sure that I need to save this query in the long term. I'm just doing a quick look. There's no need for me to have to add this, but I have the option here. And then finally, we have the ability to add labels here. And so this is another fairly significant change in 7.1, where we have moved from folders to labels. So the limitation with folders is that you can put a query or any other asset that you have only into a single folder. So it's a bit limiting in that sense. With labels, we can add multiple labels to a given query. So here I have one that I've already created in the system. I could add a new one. Let's do something really quick. And so now I can add multiple labels to a given query. It's a more flexible way, more typical with modern web applications. Now, having fully sort of set up that new query, I can now create the query by clicking the button here. Again, it brings me to the form page where I can, again, parameterize as I see fit. I'm just going to skip that in the interest of time and run my query. And ultimately, that's the same query that I created previously with some different labels and with a different name. Now, how do I access those two or any other queries that I've just created? So I come back to my queries and lists, and you can see here I have my recently executed queries. I have webinar query 1, that's the one I just created, where I fully sort of laid out the parameters of the definition of the query, not the actual form parameters. And then this one previously was the one I ran with the quick 2-button click. And you can see I've done that a few times before. Now, so I can very quickly access any recently executed queries, but sometimes this list can get very long and you might want to access a query that was done a few days ago and it's way down the list here. So there's multiple ways to access it. I can simply enter in the search bar and I can start to type and that will filter down my queries as I sort of type ahead. And as I delete those characters, it works in the normal way you would expect a search box to work. But we also have a set of filters here. So we have a project filter. So here I can select different projects. So if I go to another one, so there are none, and I can see that there are no by register queries. So I can simply remove that by clicking the X there to remove that. And then I can go back and filter here. So I can only ever select one project and I'll see any queries from that project. I can select a different project or I can simply remove that filter depending on what I want to do. Similarly, with owner, I can see only my queries and that filters down the list, or I can alternately look at all project queries and that gives me a different list within the chemical registry project. Or again, I can just remove that filter and then I'll see all of them. So very flexible way to filter and find queries. Similarly with status here, I can find permanent or temporary queries, or again, I could filter with the labels. Now, and so very easy for me to find pre-existing queries in this case. Now, let me move on here and show you, let's say I wanted to either create a new reaction exploration or analysis, or I want to access a previously run one. Now, in this test system, we don't have any run. But if I click on the Reaction Explorer bar, you'll see that the panel that comes out here looks identical to the one that we have for queries and lists. It's not populated with any data, but you can see the same search here. We see the same options here for filters, the same we would see recently executed ones if there were any. And similarly, if I were doing the same in Workspace, if I wanted to come to Workspace, find a previously run analysis, this is where I'd find it. I have all the same options. So this really highlights a key aspect of 7.1. We'll not just in the way that we've improved the navigation, but we've tried to make the system as part of that navigation much more consistent in how it operates. So once we've trained you to do an operation such as finding previous queries or to create a new query, once you've learned that, and it's pretty simple to learn it, you can do the same with reaction exploration, the same with workspaces. And there are other parts of the interface that I won't go into now in the interest of time, but highlight how we have reused as much of that tooling as possible to make it familiar and consistent for you. Now, just before I go back to the slides, one of the questions that might be coming up, might have already been asked in the Q&A panel, is, again, emphasize, use the Q&A panel, please, not the chat panel. We're really heavily monitoring the Q&A panel. Is how easy is it, with these changes, which are pretty significant, how easy is it for users to adapt to the new system? So, and what materials will we provide? Well, we're providing a lot of assets. This webinar is one of them that sort of helps you navigate, trains you, be an asset that you can use to understand how the new navigation works and be able to work around it. We have other what we call tutorials. They're essentially like tutorials, web-based tutorials, little video tutorials that show the new navigation in action. And one piece of data that we found very rewarding, or we were grateful for, is our internal testing, and as part of the 7.1 release, we had some of our internal teams that had really pretty minimal exposure to the new navigation, nothing more than what I'm essentially showing you here in this webinar. And then we asked them to test the new system and give us some feedback in terms of what's working well, or trying to find some bugs in the system before we release it. And also just give us some feedback on how the new navigation works. And an overwhelming response from them was, again, with pretty minimal exposure and training on the new navigation, after just 2 or 3 minutes, they found it quite natural to navigate around. They said, it's a change. Yes, I have to understand it's a bit different than how I've done things before, but it's a positive change, and I was pretty easily able to adapt to the new system, and I like it. So we anticipate the users will have similar, for the most part, feelings about the new navigation. All right, so let's come back to the slides. Let me finish off this section, and then we'll get into the second section. So I'm going to have a few slides where I kind of reiterate some of what I showed in the demonstration here. The first was around consolidation of user settings. As I said, for admins, this is an admin capability. So we want to make life better for our admins as well as for our end users. So as I highlighted in the demonstration, there's a single point of entry for user settings. We haven't fundamentally changed the way user settings are set, but we do have this single entry point and making it much easier and more streamlined to manage users. And as I said, similar for system settings, a single entry point to access the various system settings and make those changes and get the system operating how you want. The next item to highlight, so that covers all the navigation and all the various changes and making the system more consistent. We have 3 additional features under the modern high-quality experience aspect to highlight. The first is around request management. Here's a screenshot of the old Cascade interface. It was looking quite dated. And as I highlighted in the live demonstration, here's the new UI for, and it's no longer called Cascade, but for now request management. No functionality changes here in the capability, but a much friendlier and nicer to use interface. The next feature I want to highlight is called Configuration Management Hub. I did highlight it briefly in the live demonstration. It's a tool that's embedded into the system. It's for admins only. And in 7.1, it's a foundational capability that we will build on over subsequent releases. So it's first introduced in 7.1, but it will continue to evolve over subsequent releases. What problem are we trying to solve with Configuration Management Hub? Well, we know that with the Dotmatics platform, a real huge benefit of the platform is its flexibility and ability to be configured to meet the needs of an individual customer organization. That's a real strength of the system, but it also introduces some challenges in that because the system can and typically is very heavily configured, bespoke to a given organization, managing that configuration can be a challenge, particularly when you want to update the configuration and you want to move it from server to server. So for example, you might want to implement some changes in a development server. You then want to propagate those to a test server to evaluate them, and then ultimately to a production server. And just managing that configuration, stepping it from staging and moving it from server to server can be a challenge. And it's also a capability or a task that is most customers have Dotmatics do for them. So there's obviously some challenges there. It can be takes time to do that, to get the coordination and have a services engagement in order to do that. So we acknowledge that challenge. Again, as the system has evolved, the challenge becomes greater because the system has more capability, so there's more opportunity for configuration and broadening the configuration. So we wanted to try and solve that problem as much as possible, both make the configuration easier to manage, but also make it something that customers have the option to self-service and manage for themselves. And so this is a really significant initiative. It will, as I said, play out over several releases. And so the way it works is you access the Configuration Management Hub from the settings menu, as I showed you in the live demonstration. And then you have these options here to export configuration or part of a configuration from the source server, and then import that configuration into the target server. And a really key aspect of this, and quite an innovative part of this capability, is the ability to compare configuration from two different servers. So there's, for those who are familiar with software tools, a diff tool is one where you can compare essentially two versions of code and see where they differ. And so we have essentially a diff tool for configuration. So we call it configuration comparison. So the idea here is that as you would export some configuration, you can select that and then do at some stage you'll do the comparison here. The idea is that it allows you to highlight differences between servers before you move configuration, highlight potential problems, get the target server set up properly to accept new configuration that it's getting from the source server. And then also, once the configuration has been moved, to also highlight, what's working and what might not be working. Ideally, nothing, but what might not be working with the new server. Now, in 7.1, we've put the infrastructure in place around the Configuration Management Hub to do this, and we have also implemented it for our new inventory module. So we introduced a new inventory module with 6.1, and we have implemented this configuration management for that new inventory. So it's not for migrating from old inventory to new inventory. It's for migrating from new inventory from one server to another. So relatively limited in its scope for 7.1. Most of the work was done in terms of putting the foundational pieces in place. And then in subsequent releases, you'll see us expand it to ultimately be able to manage data discovery configuration and ELN configuration over the next 2 to 3 releases. And then finally, on the modern high-quality experience side of things, I want to talk about a new table control that we've implemented. Again, this is in 7.1, this is a foundational capability that we plan to build on over subsequent releases. Some of the feedback we got was that the grid control, first of all, in the sort of previous version, there were multiple different grid controls that all behaved a bit differently. And so ultimately, we want to improve that and work towards having a single grid or table control. And also the other piece of feedback was that the grid controls that we have didn't offer sort of the modern capabilities and features that most users expect. So these include things like the ability to do advanced filtering, to be able to reorder columns, resize the columns, advanced sorting, showing and hiding, and things like keyboard navigation, being able to tab and use the arrow keys and enter key to enter information quickly without having to use the mouse every time. So we have implemented this new table control initially in our ELN canvas forms. So again, the canvas forms were introduced in the 6.1 release, and they've been starting to be pretty widely adopted now. So if you have adopted the ELN canvas forms, then this table control will be available to you in 7.1. We don't automatically make any changes here. You'll have to. It's a manual process to update from the old table to the new table. It's not viable for us to do an automated update, and we want to give you the option to do that at the right time for you. But that new table control is available in the ELN canvas forms. And ultimately, the plan is to essentially 2 dimensions of further advancement there. One is to add additional features. So essentially 7.1 is really the foundational capabilities that allow the new table to do everything the old table did, or functional parity. In subsequent releases, we'll add more functionality within the ELN canvas table element, but also plan to look at other opportunities to implement the new table control in other parts of the interface. All right, so that highlights everything that falls into the modern high-quality experience. For the remaining time, I'm going to cover a set of new features and capabilities that we group together under the term scientific innovation. So there's 4 areas I want to cover. The first of them is around enhanced sequence visualization in data discovery. Again, data discovery being browser or browser plus. So what we have done in 7.1 is, and this is part of our overall integration initiative across the whole Dotmatics portfolio, remembering that Dotmatics, one of the capabilities and products that we have is Genius. Then what we have done is implement the Genius web-based sequence visualization capability into data discovery, into a browser, as you may think about it. So you've got a couple of screenshots here showing that, so we can show individual sequences, but this really comes to life. I'm going to show you some videos here of it in action. So there's 3 of them. The first one I'm going to show you is zooming in and zooming out with the new sequence viewer in data discovery. So here, just to set this up before I start playing the video, we have a form, a browser, or as you can see, I'm using browser too, browser form or a data discovery form. We have the sequence shown at the top here, but the lower half here is really this form element showing the rich sequence visualization. So if I play the movie, the action is going to be in these controls to the upper right-hand side of the form element here, these green bordered icons or buttons that allow us to zoom in and zoom out on the sequence. We start with the sequence at its full length. You can see it's about 82, a little over 8,200 bases here, nucleotides. So as I play the video, what's going to happen is that we're going to start to use the zoom in button to progressively zoom in. You can see we're zooming in. At some point, the black bar that represents the sequence changes to this colorful representation to indicate that we're zooming in to see more definition. And then ultimately, we make a second transition where we see the individual nucleotides. And so again, so a very smooth, seamless transition between sort of the large representation and the zoomed in representation. You can see I was able to easily zoom out to the full length and back into a fairly detailed view with those 2 other buttons there, a full length view and then a zoomed in view. So zooming, really nice. Again, it replicates what we see in the Genius tools. We're able to zoom in and get to that individual nucleotide, in this case, or individual amino acid representation. Let's then move to the second video here is going to be around translation and wrapping of the sequence visualization. So again, starting from the same point with us fully zoomed out on the sequence here, same sequence. So as you play the video, I think we're going to start by zooming in a bit. All right, zooming in deeply and then just out a little bit. And then to the center part of the form, we have the options panel. We drop that down. We can see annotations has already been selected. We're also going to select here to do translation. And so we can translate to the first or second reading frame. As you can see, now we have the amino acid sequence demonstrated. And again, we can zoom in, zoom out to see that with more resolution. We also can wrap the sequence. So now we have wrap, and so it's a little easier to see the whole sequence rather than scrolling horizontally. And again, you can zoom in, zoom out, and then view the whole sequence in this wrapped version. And finally, I think we're going to show that, just to highlight that we can show all 6 reading frames, and it's very easy to move between them. Okay, and then the final little video clip here around the sequence viewer is around finding and selecting items from the sequence. So we start here fairly well zoomed in. We've translated. We've also got annotations showing. So we have the search box here. We can simply type in a set of nucleotides and click return. That will highlight those. We can copy those to the clipboard if we wanted to. So we can directly find residues. We can also type in and look for named annotations. So here we have the CMV enhancer, and it's pulled out that whole sequence. And again, I could copy that to the clipboard. And then again, just zooming in a little bit, then I can simply drag select a set of nucleotides in this case, or amino acids if it was primarily an peptide sequence. And again, highlight those and then copy them to the clipboard for whatever future task or additional tasks I might want to do. So really rich addition to the sequence visualization capability. Again, if you have questions, get them in that Q&A panel where the team is addressing those. The next capability I want to highlight is a brand new capability called Integration Framework. And so this is a capability to support outbound RESTful web service integration. So this is a really important part of the 7.1 release. All the 7.1 releases capabilities are important, but we see this one as really important and one that might initially not be recognized as much, but in the long term, we think it's going to have a huge impact. So what problem is this trying to solve? Well, the Dotmatics platform has always been an open system. We very much welcome integration with other systems, either homegrown software systems or other third-party vendor software. It's always been our ethos to support that as much as possible. And other vendors many other vendors have a similar approach, some of them less so. But one of the challenges is that just by having APIs in your system doesn't just mean magically that two systems will talk to one another. Someone has to do the work to connect them up. And not only that, but one of the additional aspects of connecting up systems is that when data are transferred between systems, and that's quite common in these kinds of integrations, often the data may need to be reformatted in order to, or translated in some way to make it flow naturally from one system to the next. So that can represent quite a lot of challenges. So even though you have two systems that are very open, it can still represent quite a lot of work to connect them up. And that may be, a lot of our services work is done in helping to connect that system up. Sometimes customers would work for themselves, but it's often quite a challenging thing for them to do. So this is one of the key problems that we wanted to solve with the integration framework. So let me describe how this works to add some context here. So the sort of green box around the middle of the slide here, this highlights the Dotmatics platform. You can see I've slipped in terms like browser again here. I really need to clean up the slides. Of course, it's data discovery now, including the integration framework, which is this white box to the right-hand side within the green border. So it is a part of the deployment for 7.1 going forward. It's part of the system, naturally. And what it does, let's describe a flow here. So to the left here of the content within the box, we have ELN or data discovery. Imagine a user is in an ELN form or a data discovery form, and they click a button. And behind that button, there is an API call. The API call will go to the integration framework first in a system where this has been implemented. The integration framework receives that API endpoint. It parses the request, and it constructs a new request based on understanding of what it needs to do later, needs to do next. And part of that may be to reformat the data into a form that can be sent to the next system, whatever that might be. Having essentially prepared all the material, the integration framework then makes an API call itself. It could be back into the Dotmatics system if that's the workflow that's been implemented, or, and this is perhaps the more critical path, to an external system. In either case, the integration framework will receive a response back from that system, either the internal or the external system. It will parse that response and then decide on the next step to take. So think of the integration framework essentially as an API broker and data management system. You build up these workflows with the integration framework so that it can take requests, API requests, reformulate them as necessary, pass them on, get the response back, and then do the right thing, whatever that right thing is. Now, from the end user perspective, all they see is all they experience is that they click a button and then the right thing happens, a good thing happens for them, assuming that the workflow is completed accurately. So for the end user, it's very trivial because the system, we now have a more robust, more maintainable way of managing that traffic and potentially the data parsing and the data processing surrounding that. And so, yeah, so the key benefits here is that the integration framework standardizes the way that API-based calls occur within the Dotmatics platform. It's by being more standardized, they're more easily maintained. Ultimately, they're faster to set up, and they overall improve the quality of integrations. We have adopted what we consider an industry-leading technology, a third-party technology called Apache NiFi for this. And so we have taken NiFi, it's part of our distributable now with 7.1. We've done some rebranding to it, but it's now part of the 7.1 system going forward. And again, I think this is going to be incredibly valuable. We know that API-based traffic is just only going to increase in terms of how much gets used in terms of the platform. Now, to highlight how this works, kind of at a very high level, there's really three personas that are involved in making this work. The first is essentially an integration framework administrator who configures the integration flow. So they'll be working within our deployment of Apache NiFi to create these workflows, to understand what the API calls need to be, how the data needs to be potentially reformatted to complete the call successfully, the flow successfully. And so they will be able to build this. We plan to provide over time reusable subcomponents. The workflows, they can be broken up and they can be used as, parts of them can be used as templates. So if you do the same sort of thing over and over again with different workflows, you can reuse those components. It's a very modular kind of system. So it really facilitates reuse of these flows as you've built them. So we'll be building them now. Our services organization is trained in this. But again, similar to Configuration Management Hub, the intent is that this is a tool that offers our end users the ability to self-service around this. So that's the first persona who's setting up the integration workflow. The second persona is the data discovery form administrator who configures a form to utilize one of these workflows. So this could be the same individual who fulfills both persona 1 and 2. These are both admin tasks, but they don't need to be the same individual. So it's very easy for a form administrator to, as in the process of configuring a form, to select one of these workflows to attach to a button. And then the third persona is the scientist who actually interacts with the form. And all they're doing is they're clicking buttons and good things are happening, right? This is very important, right? From the end user perspective, it's a very robust system that allows them to perform tasks quickly and easily with minimal fuss on their part. And that's exactly what we want it to be. We want the end users to have a really great experience with this. So that's a really important part of 7.1 integration framework. And then the final pair of topics I want to talk about, we're in good time here with just a few minutes left in the webinar. Again, keep those Q&A coming in. We probably won't have time for a formal Q&A session. So please, if you have questions, get them into the Q&A panel. The team will be there to respond to them. And so we have a pair of capabilities that we call process capture is the first of them, and multi-experiment workflow is the second. And in keeping the theme here, what problem are we trying to solve here? Well, we know that in research-based industries, life sciences, chemicals and materials industries that we support with the Dotmatics platform, there is research where you want to essentially define and build a process. In simple terms, we might think of it as a recipe, right? If it were a process for baking a new kind of cake, we would ultimately, what we would call that at the end is it would build a new or constructed or created a recipe for baking that cake. But more broadly, we have many process-based capabilities or process-based needs that we have, particularly in chemicals and materials, but also it's not uncommon at all in the life sciences. And so we want to have the ability to define processes, to be able to experiment with different combinations or permutations of ingredients and actions, and then ultimately decide what is the best of those processes that will become the standard one that we use going forward. That's problem number one. And a very closely associated problem with that is that a single process usually or often is not enough to create the overarching product that we want to create. It's often necessary to break that overall, call it the meta process, the overall process that takes raw ingredients and ends up with that product. It is often a series of steps where each individual step can be its own process, because just the way we need to break things up and the modularity required here. And so this is something we've added now into 7.1 to much better support these process capture and what we call multi-experiment or networks of experiments. So let's go through these in turn. The first is around process capture. And so we have built some new ELN templates. There are actually 3 of them. I'm showing 2 of them here on the screen. The first is process design, where we essentially start to build our algorithm or a recipe for our process. So we want to identify the ingredients that we're going to have at each step of the process, one of these sub-processes, if you will, and the actions that we do. How long do we stir them for? How long do we mix them for? How long do we cook them for or cool them for, or whatever the operation might be, and allow you to, in a stepwise fashion, build up the process within the ELN form with including the ability to set variations. How many different variations of ingredient number 1 do I want to have? How many variations of ingredient number 2? And so that's the first step, process design. The second screenshot here is process review, is where we review the design of our process experiment, including all the various different permutations that we have. And if we are having multiple different values of multiple different ingredients or different actions, we can end up with a very large number of permutations. We might end up with 50 or 100 different permutations. I can't execute all of those in the lab typically. So what I want to do here, and what I do at the process review step, is I subselect the number of those permutations that I'm actually going to execute in the lab, and then try and identify which ones are the most effective. I could then execute additional ones if I want, or make other modifications. And the third new tab here, new ELN tab that's not shown here, is what we call process actuals, or an experiment actuals tab, where having done some subselected set of those process capture experiments, I then can analyze which ones were the most effective. So that's the process capture part of it, the ability to define these processes, essentially these recipes. We initially target this a little bit more on the chemicals and materials side with some of the nomenclature we use and some of the capabilities, but ultimately we expect this to be widely used across our customer base, and over time we'll also generalize some of that nomenclature. And process capture works hand in hand with multi-experiment workflows. So this is the ability to then tie multiple of those process capture, or indeed in future other experiments, into a network of experiments where one single experiment is not enough to define the entire process or result in the ultimate product. So you can see the screenshot, the upper screenshot, we see these purple boxes. Each of those represents an individual process capture experiment, like the one I showed you on the previous slide. The green one is what we call an analytical experiment, where we just are only using it to, it's not really part of the network, it's only there to analyze the output of one of those experiments. And so we can build up this network of experiments is maybe where we start to build the meta process, where then we define each of the individual process capture experiments, execute those, analyze those, and ultimately build up the overall process. But really, one of the key things with the multi-experiment workflows is not just that we have the ability to build this network here, but that we capture the entire metadata for the entire meta process defined by the network of these individual experiments. And so we can capture that, we can search it. It becomes a unit of data that we can use to really understand from the whole meta process, the meta set of experiments, what what are my ultimate inputs, what are my outputs, what is my best path to create the product that I want to create. So again, initial implementation in 7.1 for both of these. Will continue to build on them in subsequent releases as well, but they're ready to use with 7.1. Now, I think we're right on time here, so let me just wrap up. Hopefully all the Q&A has been answered. If anything, we didn't get to any questions, we will follow up, or if there are more specific questions for a given customer, we can follow up offline. But if you want more information on Dotmatics, please go to the Dotmatics.com website or contact your account manager. If you're looking to start to consider an upgrade, that's the place to start. For additional Dotmatics events, please go to dotmatics.com/events. We have a number of great events coming up. Also others, as I said at the start, all of our events are recorded, so they can be viewed on demand. And then finally, if you have any support-related questions, please contact support@dotmatics.com. With that, I will thank you very much for your attention today. Thank you for your Q&A. As I said, we'll follow up for anything we didn't get addressed. I'm really excited about the 7.1 release. It's out now. Hopefully you'll be excited with it as well, with the new navigation and new capabilities, and we're really excited to get it in your hands and have you start to use it. Thank you very much, and that's all. Thank you.